After the Treaty of Paris, the Philippines was subject to the power of the United States of America, effectively the new colonizers of the country. In 1898 to 1901, Philippines was placed under military government until a civil service would be put in place. Acts of the United States Congress. Acts of the United States Congress. Philippine Organic Act of 1902, the first organic law for the Philippine Islands that provided for the creation of a popularly elected Philippine Assembly. Legislative power would be vested in a bicameral legislative. Philippine Commissions, Upper House, Philippine Assembly, Lower House, Key Provision, Bill of Right for Filipinos, appointment of 2 non-voting Filipinos, resident commissioners of the Philippines. Acts of the United States Congress. Philippine Organic Act of 1916 John's Law modified the structure of the Philippine government through the removal of the Philippine Commission Senate. Upper House and its members, elected by the Filipino voters first truly elected nationwide legislatures. The act also explicitly declared the purpose of U.S. to their sovereignty over Philippines and recognize Philippine independence as soon as a stable government can be established. 1932, with the efforts of the Filipino independence mission led by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Rojas, United States Congress passed the Her House Cutting Act with the promise of the granting Filipinos independence. The bill was opposed by then Senate President Manuel L. Quezon and consequently got rejected by the Philippine Senate. In 1934, Trading Smack-Duffy Act of the Philippine Independence Act was passed by the U.S. Congress that provided authority and defined mechanisms for the establishment of formal constitution by a constitutional convention. Preamble of the 1935 Commonwealth. The Filipino people, exploring the aid of divine providence in order to establish a government that shall embody their ideals, conserve and develop the patrimony of the nation, promote the general welfare, and secure to themselves and their posterity the blessing of the independence under a regime of justice, liberty, and democracy, do ordain and promulgate this Constitution. Commonwealth of the Philippines. It is created by the Constitution as administrative body that governed the Philippines from 1935 to 1946, a transitional administration to prepare the country towards its full achievement of independence. Originally provided for a cameral nation assembly with a president and vice president to 6-year term with re-election. Amended in 1940 to have bicameral Congress composed of Senate and House of Representatives, as well as the creation of an independent Electoral Commission and limited the term of office of the President and Vice President to 4 years with 1 re-election. Rights of suffrage, originally for female citizen of the Philippines aged 21 years old, over and able to read and write. Later extension for women with 2 years after the adoption of the Constitution. Influences in the Constitution: America, Malolos Constitution, German, Spanish, Mexican Constitution, several South America countries, and unwritten English Constitution. Draft was approved by the Constitutional Convention on February 8, 1935, ratified by the U.S. President Franklin B. Roosevelt, and on March 1935, elections were held in September 1935 with Manuel L. Quezon as the elected President of the Commonwealth. Commonwealth was briefly interrupted by the of the World War II, with Japanese occupying the country. July 4, 1946, Philippines was being declared as an independent republic. The Constitutional Authoritarian. On 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected as president. On 1967, Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. On 1969, Marcos won the re-election in a bid boosted by campaign overspending and use of government funds. On November 20, 1970, elections of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. On June 1, 1971, the convention was formally started with former President Carlos P. Garcia being elected as convention president. Unfortunately, he died and was succeeded by another former president, Diosdado Macapagal. Before the convention finished its work, martial law was declared. Marcos cited a growing communist insurgency as a reason for the martial law, which was provided in the 1935 Constitution. Some delegates of the ongoing Constitutional Convention were placed behind the bars and others went hiding or were voluntarily exiled. With Marcos as dictator, the direction of the convention turned. Some provisions of the Constitution are dictated. Manipulation of the document to be able to hold on to power for as long as he could. On November 29, 1972, the convention approved its proposed constitution. The constitution was supposed to introduce a parliamentary-style government where legislative power and cameral National Assembly members being elected to a 6-year term, president, symbolic, and ceremonial head of state will be selected from the members of the National Assembly. Would serve 6-year term and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. Executive power, Prime Minister, Head of Government, and Commander-in-Chief, the Armed Force, who has also to be elected from the National Assembly. Presidential Decree Number 73. It was issued by President Marcos setting the date to plebiscite to ratify or reject by the proposed constitution on November 30, 1973. Was postponed later on since Marcos feared that the public vote to reject the constitution. Instead of a plebiscite, citizens' assemblies were held from January 10 to 15, 1973. Citizens decided on whether to ratify the Constitution, suspend the convening of the Interim National Assembly, continue martial law, or place a moratorium on election for a period of at least several years. January 17, 1973, the President issued a proclamation announcing that the proposed Constitution had been ratified by an overwhelming vote of the members of the highly irregular Citizens' Assemblies. 1976 Citizens' Assemblies decided to allow the constitution of martial law as well as approve the amendments. Entering Batasang Pambansa to substitute for the Interim National Assembly. The President to become the Prime Minister and continue to exercise legislative powers until martial law was lifted and authorized by the President to legislation of own emergency basis. On 1980, the retirement age of member of the judiciary was extended to 70 years. In 1981, the parliamentary system was formally modified to a French-style semi-presidential system where executive power was restored to the president. Executive commitment was to be created composing of Prime Minister and 14 others that will serve as the President's cabinet. Some electoral reforms were instituted. On 1984, the Executive Committee was abolished and the position of the Vice President was restored. The 1973 Constitution was merely a way for President to keep executive powers to abolish the Senate. Never acted as parliamentary system, instead functioned as an authoritarian presidential system, with all the real power concentrated in the hands of the President with the backing of the Constitution. On 1983, Benigno Aquino Jr., opposition leader and regarded as the most credible alternative to President Marcos, was assassinated while under military escort immediately after his return from exile in the United States. There was a whispered suspicion that assassination came from the top levels of the government and the military. The event caused the coming together of the nonviolent opposition against Marcos' authoritarian regime. Marcos was then forced to hold the snap elections a year early, and said elections were made by whispered fraud. Marcos declared himself as a winner despite international and nationwide protests. A small group of military rebels attempted to stage a coup but failed. However, thing triggered the EDSA People Power Revolution of 1986. With under the pressure of the United States of America, the Marcos family fled into exile. On February 25, 1986, his opponent in the snap election, Benigno Aquino Jr.'s widow Corazon Aquino, was installed the President of the Philippines.
1987. The Constitution after martial law. President Corazon Aquino's government has the three options regarding the constitutions. The 1987 Constitution safeguards our institutions from a repeat of Marcos' martial law regime. The Supreme Court is empowered to review all official acts to determine if there has been grave abuse of discretion. Congress cannot be padlocked. March 1986. In March 1986, President Aquino proclaimed a transitional constitution to last for a year, while a constitutional commission drafted a permanent constitution. Freedom Constitution. Freedom Constitution is a transitional constitution that maintains many provisions of the old one. 1986. In 1986, Constitutional Convention was created. This is appointed by President Aquino that composed of 48 members. Marcos in 1972. The convention drew up a permanent constitution, but with new ways to keep the president in check, a reaction to the experience of Marcos' rule. February 2, 1987. In February 2, 1987, the new constitution was officially adopted. Democratic Republican State. The Philippines established as a democratic republican state where sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates them. The executive branch is headed by the President and his cabinet, whom he appoints. The head of the state and the chief executive is the President, but his power is limited. This is to put the place a safeguard of the country from the experience of martial law during Marcos' presidency. In cases of national emergency, the President may still declare martial law, but not longer than a period of 60 days. The Supreme Court may also review the declaration of martial law and decide if there were sufficient justifying facts for the act. The President and the Vice President are elected at large by a direct vote, serving by a single 6-year term. The legislative power resides in a Congress divided into two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The 24 senators are elected at large by popular vote and can serve no more than 2 consecutive 6-year terms. The House of Representatives is composed of district representatives representing a particular geographic area and makes up around 80% of the total numbers of representatives. The 1987 Constitution created a party list system to provide spaces for the participation of underrepresented community sectors or groups. Aside from the exclusive power of legislation, Congress may also declare wars through a 2/3 vote in both upper and lower houses. The power of legislation, however, is also subject to an executive check, as the President retains the power to stop a bill from becoming a law. The Philippine court system is vested with the power of judiciary and is composed of a Supreme Court and lower as created by law. The Supreme Court justices may hear, on appeal, any cases dealing with the constitutionality of any law. Treaty or decree of the government cases where questions of jurisdiction or judicial error are concerned, or cases where the penalty is sufficiently grave. The Supreme Court is also in charge of overseeing the functioning and administration of the lower courts and their personnel. Three independent constitutional commissions. The first one is Civil Service Commission, and the second one is the Commission on Elections, and the third and last one is Commission on Audit. The Civil Service Commission is a central agency in charge of government personnel. The commissions on election mandated to enforce and administer all election laws and regulations. The Commission on Audit, which examines all funds, transactions, and property accounts of the government and its agencies. To further promote the ethical and lawful conduct of the government, the Office of the Ombudsman was created to investigate complaints that pertain to public corruption, unlawful behavior of public officials, and other public misconduct. The Ombudsman can charge public officials before the Sandigan Bayan, a special court created for the purpose. Only the House of Representatives can initiate the impeachment of the President. Members of the Supreme Court and other constitutionally protected public officials, such as the Ombudsman. The Senate will then try the impeachment case. This is another safeguard to promote moral and ethical conduct in the government.
Attempts to amend or change the 1987 Constitution. The 1987 Constitution provided for three methods by which the Constitution can be amended, all requiring ratification by a majority vote and a national referendum. These methods were Constituent Assembly, Constitutional Convention, and a People's Initiative. Using these modes, there were efforts to amend or change the 1987 Constitution, starting with the presidency of Fidel V. Ramos, who succeeded Corazon Aquino. The first attempt was in 1995 when the Secretary of National Security Council, Jose Almonte, drafted a constitution, but it was exposed to the media and it never prospered. The second effort was happened in 1997 when a group called PIRMA hoped to gather signatures from voters to change the constitution through People's Initiative. Many were against this, including Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, who brought the issue to court and won with Supreme Court judging that a People's Initiative cannot push through without enabling law. The succeeding president, Joseph Ejercita Estrada, formed a study commission to investigate the issues surrounding charter change, focusing on the economic and judiciary provisions of the Constitution. This effort was also blocked by different entities after President Estrada was replaced by another people power and succeeded by his vice president, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Then the House Speaker Jose de Venecia endorsed constitutional change through a constituent assembly, which entails a 2/3 vote of the House to propose or propose amendments or revision to the Constitution. This initiative was also not successful since the term of President Arroyo was mired in controversy and scandal, including the possibility of Arroyo extending her terms as president, which the Constitution does not allow. The administration of the succeeding President Benigno Aquino III had no marked interest in charter change, except those emanating from different members of Congress, including the Speaker of the House, Felencio, that concern economics provisions that aims towards liberalization. This effort did not see the light of day. Federalism in the Philippines was supported by President Duterte in 2016 president elections, saying that it will eventually distribute wealth in the Philippines instead of concentrating it in Manila, the capital of the country. As a form of government, a central governing authority and constituent political units constitutionally share sovereignty applied to the Philippines, and the country will be broken into autonomous regions. Each regions will be further divided into local government units. The regions will have the primary responsibility of industry development, public safety and institution, education, healthcare, transportation, and many more. Each region will also take charge of their own finances, plans for developments, and laws executive to their area. The national government, on the other hand, will only handle matters of national interest such as foreign policies and defense, among others. In this system, it is possible for the central government and the regions to share certain powers. Our current system is that of unitary form, where administrative powers and resources are concentrated in the national government. Mayors and governors would have to rely on allocations provided to them through a proposed budget that is also approved by the national government, a system prone to abuse. There are many pros to a federal form of government. Each region may custom fit solutions to problems brought about by their distinct geographic, cultural, social, and economic contexts. Regions also have more power over their finances since they handle majority of their income and only contributes a small portion to the national government. They can choose to directly fund their own development projects without asking for the national government's go signal. A federal system could also promote specialization since the national government can take care of the administrative issues. A federal form of government could also solve a lot of decade-old problems of the country. It may be a solution to the conflict in Mindanao, since a separate Bangsamoro region could be established for Muslim Mindanao. It could address the inequality in wealth distribution and lessen the dependence to Metro Manila, since regions can proceed with what they have to do without needing to consider the situation in the capital. There are also cons to federalism. While it creates competition among regions, it could also be a challenge to achieving unity in the country. There might be regions which are not ready to govern themselves or have less resources, which could mire them deeper in poverty and make development uneven in the country. There could be issues regarding overlaps in jurisdiction, since ambiguities may arise where national ends and regional begins, or vice versa. as a proposed solution to the conflict in Mindanao, we must also remember that autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao (ARMM) has already created, and the conflict still continues. Federalism may not be enough for those who clamor separation. Any effort to shift the system of government also entails costs, and it would not be cheap. It would cost billions to dismantle the current system, and it would take a long time before the system normalizes and irons out its kinks. In an upsurge of populism, President Rodrigo Duterte won the 2016 presidential election in a campaign centering on law and order. Proposing to reduce crime by killing tens of thousands of criminals, he is also known as an advocate of federalism, a compound mode of government combining a central or federal government with regional governments in a single political system. This advocacy is in part an influence of his background being a local leader in Mindanao that has mired in poverty and violence for decades. On 7th of December 2016, President Duterte signed an executive order creating a consultative committee to review the 1987 Constitution.